Hi everybody, welcome to the first live edition of Not Another Tooling podcast with my wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. Hi to anybody who's joining us for the first time. Normally we pre-record these things and put them out available for people to watch whenever, but we're moving to this LinkedIn Live format on a regular basis. To enable you to interact with us in real time. So if you've got any questions, comments, or whatever about what we're talking about today, feel free to go into the comment section, add them in there, and then we can respond in real time for you. So I guess just a little bit of background about us. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself to our
yeah, sure. So nearly a couple decades in enterprise tooling, so probably sums it up mostly. That's from using the products to administering them, to consulting them, to designing them, to building in some spaces, but now more so sitting in a advisory or strategy position, but all in the tooling space. So bread and butter, probably done most of the tools and capabilities that exist.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, and I've worked on the vendor side for 20 years now, I think. So yeah, good amount of time experience with so many different organizations and customers around the world, from small to huge, seen pretty much every tool that's out there, I think, in that time. So yeah, all good. Wonderful. Right. Well, today we are going to talk about the top 5 tooling mistakes that we see customers make. And believe you me, we could have made a pretty long list of this, but we've narrowed it down to 5. The 5 most important, we think, anyway. The very first one is my absolute favorite, and something that you'll see me bang on about on almost every edition of this podcast, is people buying, running, using tools and not being aligned to their business objectives. Matt, what do you see in this space?
Yeah. So knowing what you need them for, I think, is the main thing. And probably historically where that seems to break down is where it's been a vendor or provider based led conversation versus a customer led conversation. So almost manufacturing the requirements after you've pretty much been sold the product or the idea or whatever the thing is. So if you're originating yourself, look back to the business and look to see what you need to achieve all the way through to the business objectives, not just the technical things that you need at the low level. But obviously more to talk on that. Go.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Is when I've responded to a lot of RFPs in my time, they are generally technical stuff. They say, here we go, I need this capability, I need you to look at Azure, and I need you to do these technical things. None of them say, as a business, we're trying to move from X to Y, and therefore we really need to reduce our MTTR so that we can increase our customer satisfaction and we can improve our NPS score, and we think that will make this amount of increase in our revenue, or whatever the thing is, right? And we see a massive disconnect when people on the ground using these tools are not engaged in those conversations, and most of them aren't, right? They come to work every day, particularly if you're in level 1, level 2 support, right? You're sat there, you're answering queries all day. You don't realize what a difference you make and the tools you're using are making to the organization that you're working for. And these things are rarely tracked either, right? You know, what people don't typically even understand how much an incident costs them, let alone how much they're reducing the cost of that incident by doing something cool in their tool that is going to help improve their profit margins in the business and therefore return some shareholder value. For example, I'm going off on one now because this is my favorite topic.
No, let's pick up on one of the key words you had there, right? Disconnect. So I think there's always been notions of business having like the goals, right? This is clearly how the business has got to the position they got in. But the disconnect is a literal thing. Those things up there are not matching to the things down here. Now, whether that was some sort of hierarchical position and a breakdown view of the different components. That would make sense. But it's ultimately the connection between the business things that are needed and then the low level capabilities. The technical stuff will work itself out to a degree, but it's that break or that lack of connection. That's the biggest problem in this space.
So, you know, there are some things you can do on this. And this isn't just, by the way, when you're buying a new tool, this is with your existing tool sets as well. Go and understand what you're trying to do as a business. Make sure everybody understands from the top to the bottom. And then you can start to look at aligning what you're doing with your tools with those business objectives. And we did a really good kind of starting point of that on our last podcast, which you can go and listen to shortly, which was going and looking through an incident dump to see where you can make an immediate impact to the business through analysing that data. So that's the first one, I think.
Just on the that analysis exercise that we did, although it was the last one that we recorded, I think it's probably 3 or 4 releases down the line. So it might be about 6 weeks-ish before it's launched. But yeah, it is going to come out. And that is a really useful session for most because nobody does that exercise and we talked about it in the detail. But yeah, that is a really good one.
Good, wonderful. Okay, so that's the first one. You've aligned now with your business objectives. Everybody understands what they're doing. The second biggest mistake that we see is people buying too much tool, we'll call it, and this is one of your favorite topics, Matt. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's favorite topics because it seems rife at the moment, and it only seems rife at the moment because general budget constraints and all those things that mean less money to do things have surfaced it. So like out of 4 customer conversations in the last 6 weeks or so, 2 of them have been on this budget reduction conversation have essentially spent too much, very, very clearly spent too much. And what I mean by spend too much is a better word, I guess, will be right sizing. Aligning to the first point, what is it you're trying to achieve, and then not buying too much to fulfill that. And when I say buying too much to fulfill that, there's the buying too much to fulfill it now, which is a more easy thing, right? You know, you don't need maturity level 10 if you only mature level is 6 or whatever it might be. It's also being over ambitious with where you think you'll get to. So you'll be sold a story where you can mature through the product state to get to that maturity 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it might be. But there's got to be a pinch of realism in making that decision. Because if you're buying to mature to that space, if you ain't going to get there, you've essentially bought too much product. And generally, I wouldn't have said this back in the day, but I feel it's a much stronger position these days just to don't buy as much. Let me ratify that. Underbuy, buy, outgrow the product. There are little organizations I've dealt with who are in a position to outgrow the product. And by the way, this outgrowing of the product notion was probably more of a real thing back in the day. But now this mid-market's so strong, if you become to outgrow a product, likelihood is with how fast things are progressing, that product will also be growing with you. So I think the chances of being able to outgrow a product are so thin. I was speaking to someone literally just yesterday about a product that we're looking at and it not having quite the correct capability. It's not there. I'm like, when you get to that level of maturity, it's a problem. You ain't at that level of maturity right now, so don't piss about. Just work with that vendor because they'll fix that for you in 2 years' time when you're ready to do it. So yeah, don't buy more than you need based on the requirements you're gathering and grow with a product. But I dare you to outgrow a product. I dare you. I rarely think that will happen. Rarely.
Yeah, completely agree, right? And I think ITSM is one of those places probably where we see it more than anything else, where people are buying everything that a vendor's got on a truck. And actually, there's only 2 or 3 functions that they really need to improve their business right now. And then they get massively frustrated because they're using 2% of the capability of every little bit of the product rather than using 80% of 2 or 3 bits of it, where they could really get some value out and move the needle on those things that are really important to their business. and yet they're spending a fortune, and then they've got to go and justify to their CFO for renewals every year. It's a painful cycle.
So why does it happen? I was just thinking then, like, with some of the reasons what get to that point. It's not stupid people doing stupid things, clearly.
No.
I feel like some scenarios, that overspending, that overbuying is coercive, I think is a fair word to use. Because buy this, well, if you buy this many now, this is going to be the price, and add this on as well, and this will be the price, and add this on as well. I work with a relatively decent SI a few years ago now, and they had a particular vendor's suite. I don't know, 70-80% of the products are on the shelf because they felt they needed to buy all of it to get a good deal, but it was like a negative deal because they never really got to the point of using the products. So it's really, really difficult not to like take the carrot and buy more to get a better price, but stick to the requirements what you need right now in the very immediate future and buy that and then outgrow that. If you're outgrowing your space, then well done to you. Rarely do I see it. So, but I can see that's how they would get to that point. I've been selling. I can, hands up. That's what you want to buy. No, you need another 1,000 units. This is the reason why you never use 1,000 units. Never mind. So I can understand and appreciate how people get to that point, but work on outgrowing versus giving space to grow. That seems counterintuitive. I think that's the only way to protect people in that buying process is plan to outgrow, don't plan to grow into. Seems really backwards saying that, but what else, man? Still happens today.
That's true. And if you get number 1 point right, then you're going out to the market looking for something that achieves certain business outcomes for you, and therefore any parts of the product that don't hit those business outcomes, why would you want to pay for them right now? You want to stick and do what you're trying to achieve really, really well. But I think the other thing that you talked about there with the vendor leads us on to our point number 3 really nicely, which is the third mistake we see is people not thinking about vendors, MSPs, GSIs as a partnership, right?
So you said GSIs. What's GSIs?
Oh yeah, global systems integrator.
Okay.
Just an SI. Yeah, GSI.
Interesting.
So a lot of people look at this as, right, we are buying a product from a vendor. They are there to serve us and away you go. But actually it's a two-way street. And if you're working with a vendor, talking to them about the business problems that you're trying to solve, and that's your focus, you get into this collaborative piece, because most vendors want to grow and want to keep their customers happy. Is when you start talking to vendors and trying to understand how they work, they have some interesting metrics, right? It's not just how much they sell, it's how happy their customers are, so their NPS score, how much revenue they grow each
NPS score. Do you want to explain that for the viewers? It was a new phrase we picked up many weeks ago now.
Okay, net promoter score, kind of like customer satisfaction, but on a bigger scale. So most supermarkets, when you're filling in a survey and whatever, you're filling in their NPS score. It's essentially a fairly standard methodology globally for measuring customer satisfaction, etc. And definitely something that every large organization looks at. So your vendor has probably got an NPS score that they need to increase. So therefore they want you to be happy. But your vendor also has something probably called net dollar retention or net retention rate, which is how much they grow your revenue from all their customers by every year, and they probably have a target around that as well. So they really want to enter into a partnership with you and work out, okay, we've made you successful in this business area, how do we take that to the next level, make you successful again and again and again. So if you can understand as an organization how your vendor is targeted, and they can understand how you're targeted, i.e. by delivering better profit by driving down MTTR and cost of incidents. For an example, you start to get into these partnership conversations that are much more fruitful than vendor versus organization, butt heads, and doesn't really go anywhere. But I know you wanted to talk a bit. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, or if you want to move on to, you were going to talk about
one brief comment. And I think from like a vendor and even like service provider, there's always this like I don't know what it is, some barrier or something. Don't quite trust the vendor, or don't quite trust the service provider. And clearly there's those kind of relationships that are not super great. And we had a good session previously, it's definitely in our catalog somewhere, around how better to manage that relationship. And essentially it's getting all the right information and everybody's wants, desires, outcomes visible, so everybody knows what game they're playing. But going back to the 2 steps before, understanding what you need and then getting the right thing, observation I've came to realization of is actually selecting the thing also based upon that vendor, that person, that culture, that soft thing.
Yeah.
Because although you might have an all singing, all dancing product here or there, whichever capability across the board this is, actually, to a degree, it doesn't matter how good that product could be if you've got a real toxic relationship with the vendor or the service provider or whatever else. And then flip it around, if the product's not that good, but you've got a really, really great relationship with the vendor or the service provider, you're probably going to get on loads better with that, the softer side being in play versus the technical thing being in play. So the my camera's getting blurry. And the realization is like that soft stuff, that vendor relationship should have a real strong weighting when you're having your procurement activity, because the product's always going to change, get better or worse or whatever else. It'll be very, very difficult for the business and the culture to change. So I'd be focusing on like good customer or vendor or service provider, that first. Well, say not first, but in parallel to the technical capabilities, that'll be very, very strong weighting in a scoring activity for myself, because it's invaluable. And I realise how invaluable now, looking back over the years, going, all the good times that worked out is because it was a good vendor most of the time, or service provider.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing that is often lost is that, if you work for a specific organization, you know how your organization works, right? And you have however many years of thinking about that organization, and you've got your processes and your structures and how you do things, right? One great thing that you see in working with these other partners, whether it's the vendor or your MSP or your systems integrator, right, is that they're probably working with multiple customers every single week. They've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of customers over a period of time, and they can bring that expertise into you and say, okay, great, I see the outcome you want to achieve. Having worked with another 10 banks in the last year, like your bank, here's some ideas that might work, versus sticking with the way that you've always done things. Now, it might not be possible to create that change, but it brings a fresh level of thinking. So it's not just what can your product do, but how have other customers solved the problems that we're trying to solve using your product type approach. That makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, that is I could definitely talk for a long, long time on that, just because I feel I much more these days understand the importance of it. Yes.
Yeah. Totally. And just make sure that's with every partner that you're in, right? If you've got an MSP or an SI that is running your infrastructure, let's say, and you're about to go out to market for a new monitoring tool, you want to involve them in those discussions, right? You want to make sure that they're aligned with your thinking and your objectives, and any input they've got comes in as well. Shouldn't be separate pieces of the jigsaw. Bring everybody in together and have this kind of partnership mentality, I think. So number 4 is another one of your favorites, Matt, which is people not putting money in their tools budget for essentially continuous improvement. So after the first year, what we typically see is people have budgeted for buying a tool, getting it stood up, you know, some PS, some training, that sort of thing in year one. Year two, the only thing they've got in their budget is the amount for renewal, license renewal or subscription renewal for that tool and nothing else. Why is that a bad thing, Matt?
I'm just going to take a step back, and essentially it's a counter to the first or second one around spending too much, and this is ultimately spending too less. And why it's a bad thing is because why are you going to go for the rigmarole of getting even like the not so mature, not so fantastic products? Why are you going to go through that process if you're not going to continuously feed and water it? And I think I've had this conversation. I've tried to always like bring it back to like a car scenario. I think it was a Rolls Royce was the example I used before, but people buy these Rolls Royces and they've gone through, and whether it's like keeping up with the Joneses or whatever the reason is, they've ended up purchasing the Rolls. They've then a year later come to the service and they're not willing to spend the 300, 400, 500 quid a tire and the, you know, the oil change that costs £2,000.
Yep.
So it ends up just being this Rolls Royce that sits on the drive, and they can't really drive because they can't really maintain it, and they haven't paid for a driver, and all these things essentially just diminishes the thing that you've gone ahead and done in the first place. It's not to say you should just spend loads of money. You've got to see it through. You've got to see it through if you're going to realize the value. When the vendors and things are selling products to businesses, it's always with the intent that the business is going to get value from it. But there needs to be an understanding that it isn't going to be a one-off purchase and it's going to fix the world. If you're budgeting for a product, service, whatever else, you better be looking at the budget 3-4 years down the line to feed and water it. And it's probably going to be much more expensive for that than it is to the initial purchase.
Yeah.
And I feel like people scrape together enough funds to buy the thing, and they can never really get to the point of getting the extra cash for it because they've not budgeted for it, and it hasn't proved value in that time. So you need to spend more money on it. It's like, I'm a CFO, why am I going to bother putting more money into this when it's clearly been a bad investment? But it was never a bad investment. You just didn't budget for the things you need to spend the money on. And that's product, people, services, extra product components. It's all the bits around it. But yeah, continuously spend, you know, all that big umbrella of activity. Otherwise, I feel it'll be a regretting purchasing position.
Yeah, absolutely right. And hopefully if you followed some of the earlier steps we talked about as well, in that first year, you got to a load of value with this tool, and it's pretty easy to then justify the additional spend next year. To say, okay, look, this is what we move the needle on. And so, yeah, we are going to use that extra money that we put in for PS to help us get the next bit of value out, or move up to the next module that we didn't buy in the first place because we were not buying too much tool, right? Because we know that will really help us now. Definitely put some more budget in there for sure. That'll be good.
I think just to close this one off, I feel like everybody will be happier if you make sure you're prepared to continue to spend, like just happy on all fronts, vendor clearly, any service providers clearly, you as a business clearly, because if you're going to continue to spend, you're going to be close to realizing the things that you should have been able to realize making that decision in the first place. So be willing to spend, and everybody will be happier, including yourself, and ultimately the performance of the business, depending on what the product or service is.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add is, this is a journey, right? You should be on a journey with your vendor and your partners on these kind of tooling things. What you don't want, the worst case scenario, is you bought something 2 or 3 years later, you're disillusioned, you never got any value out of it, you're chucking it out, you're doing the same thing again and again. I know organizations that have done that for years and years, and you know they're on a 3-year buying cycle and then they chuck it out and they go again, and the cost of change is crazy, the amount of time and effort it takes, right? So if you're thinking about this as a journey, which should be at least 5 years long, you know, preferably 10 years long, maybe plus, then you want to be constantly investing into that journey to make sure you get the most out of it, I think. Cool. Right. And number 5 is a really nice, simple one. that people could pick up today, which is, please go and read the manual. Go on the online training courses or reach out to other people for help with your product. Most people only skim the surface of what their tool is capable of doing in this space. And there is so much more you could get out of that if you put the time and effort into it, right? And if you think back to what we were talking about vendors earlier, right? The vendors want you to be more engaged with your tool and get more out of it. So most of them these days offer a load of online training for free, even things like certification and stuff like that. But the more you can invest time in it, which is often quite hard in operations, right? Because everything's on fire all the time and we're trying to answer tickets and respond to incidents and all this good stuff. But, you know, leadership need to help people make time to continually train their people so that they get the best out of their tools. That's another thing that I really see when people are chucking tools out and moving on to the next one, is they've really not understood the capabilities of their existing tool properly. And if they had, they probably wouldn't need to be on this journey right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for my totally honest, I didn't listen to everything you said because I was responding to some comments. But so that, like, training and whatever else, there's multiple facets, isn't there? Multiple facets. Yeah. So if I was to summarize the kind of things those people who are going to be doing the things with the tools, those are the people you're going to be empowering, right? So the training, the certification paths, there's so many good reasons why you would do that, let alone for their individual career development, for sure. And if they feel like they're being invested in and empowered, back to that budget scoping, right? If we've got the right budget to help them do that, they're going to feel they empower themselves, but also become like the evangelist. And they'll be looking at all those features and nuggets and little things that can be added on. So that's a great space. Unfolding just a little bit outside is the communities. Yeah, we want to engage with the vendor and understand the roadmap and have that continuous conversation. But the communities that all talk the same language are outside of the partner or the vendor or whatever else. Those are super powerful. And definitely most of the interactions I've had over the last decade or so, people with top-notch products aren't engaged in those communities. And I feel like it's such a lost opportunity because there's so much useful, free information to be gained to help those businesses move forwards in, oh, have you done this module? What did you do for that? Have you heard about this? Have you done it this way? Those conversations are rich in communities, not necessarily just with the vendor. So I was listening to you really, I was also commenting back to Daniel.
No problem. That's absolutely fine. Were there, so we've covered our top 5. Did you have any questions coming from anybody while you were?
There's been a couple from Daniel, which I think answered on the fly. But I can't see actually who is on, who else is on. Can you see anybody on? I can't see. I can see comments, but I can't see.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat. So
okay,
all right. Let me sum it up then, because we're pretty much at the half-hour mark. So today we've talked about the top 5 tooling mistakes we typically see clients make. The first one was not being aligned with your business objectives. The second one was buying too much tool, i.e. don't buy every module if you don't need it. The third one was not entering into a vendor, MSP, SI partnership. Don't see the vendor and your organization as 2 very separate things. They should be there trying to help you with number 1, which is getting aligned with your business objectives and making sure you meet them. Number 4 was put money into your budget for improvement, not just year 1 getting the product stood up, but have money in there every single year over and above your maintenance or subscription costs, so that you can get more and more out of the tool. And the final one was, when you bought your tool, make sure that your people are trained on it, that they've read the manual, they've done the training, they're getting the certification, or get them help if they need it, so that you can get the most out of your tools, which are incredibly capable these days. And most people are just skimming the surface. Have I missed anything, Matt?
Really good summary as always. Yeah, really good summary as always. I guess before we properly close then, just this was our first LinkedIn Live. And I feel like technically it's kind of worked out. Obviously, hope it plays back. We will likely continue this path forwards with lives, mixture of us, but we've also got some sessions in the pipeline for LinkedIn Lives. We have guest speakers coming in. So we are absolutely welcoming people to join us and talk on topics that they're passionate about, knowledge about. But in the pipeline at the moment, there's at least two, I think, coming from my side, Austin, and I'm sure you got some as well. One's going to be around data, so CI and asset data. So we're going to bring in ultimately an expert in that space who's very passionate. We can talk at length at that. We have talked about it briefly ourselves, but there's much more to be said. And then the other one, which I think is going to be a maturing space for a lot of ITSM users and organizations, is enterprise service management, which I think is just a untapped space. It's badged on different ITSM vendors' web pages, but I don't think the notion of the detail of ESM is really understood properly. So those will be two lives we'll be having over the next few months, but I still think you got one or two potentially lined up as well.
Definitely, yeah. I've got a CTO from a very prominent organization lined up to talk about tooling and the effects the cloud has on our tooling space. And I've got a number of other people who want to join. But if you listeners would like to get involved, then please feel free to drop Matt or Malcolm, Matt, Malcolm, or myself, Austin Pearson, a message.
I don't mind Malcolm. Like, some people call me Malcolm. You know, like sometimes people feel offended, you get the wrong name. Like as soon as someone says Malcolm, I go, yeah, I think I prefer Malcolm, you know. Anyway, different topic.
That's good. I don't have that. If you call me Pearson, yeah, it's I'm not too happy with that. But yeah, if you want to get involved and be a guest on the podcast in the future, then drop one of us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you've got any questions or topics that you want us to cover off in the future, or you've got any queries about what we've shared today and you're just too shy to stick yourself in the comments, no problem. Reach out to either one of us and we'd love to spend a bit of time with you and explore things further. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate you coming and spending a bit of time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Not Another Tooling Podcast. The next one will be pre-recorded and available in 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that it will be a live session again. And if you've enjoyed it, please spread the word, tell your friends and colleagues, and bring them along to a future session. Thanks very much.
See you all later, guys. Bye-bye.